How's it going, everybody, and welcome back to Genesis Barbell. Today I'm going to be kicking off a little new series where we'll be talking about some advanced protocols. Now, these protocols might not necessarily be too advanced, they just don't fall under the category of the fundamentals. So it'll be slightly deviated from the general aspects around programming and more specific to some of the little details that we like to include that we might throw in for a particular athlete in a given scenario. So today we're going to be talking about progressions and how we like to set up progressions from one movement to the next, translating the qualities of these movements to be able to finish off with a stronger lift, whether that's the squat, bench, or deadlift, or some kind of variation. So as an example, we might want to strengthen our hamstrings, and so we start off with a very non-specific hamstring movement, and we translate that to be able to improve the quality of something like our deadlift or our squat, and we do that through a series of movements where we translate that improved quality from one to the next until we end up with a better main lift or variation of that lift. So we're going to be looking at some details and how we can approach doing this. So tune in, check it out, and we're going to be going through all the details. All right, so we're going to jump straight into this idea of progressions, okay? And once again, this is going to be taking one non-specific or very low specificity movements, and we're going to translate that from one movement to the next, getting a little bit more specific to the goal that we're trying to achieve from block to block. Okay, so we can, within a block, make these translations from one movement to the next, but ideally what we want to do is saturate the returns of each movement within a block, and then once we head to the next training block, we throw in a more specific movement closer to where we want to get to, and through doing that, have that translation from the movements that we're trying to improve on. Okay, so what I have in front of me right here is a bit of a spreadsheet. Now we've got a column for each lift. So we've got the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, and I'm going to go through some examples of what we can do to make use of this idea of progressions. Okay, so we're going to start off with the most simple one, okay, for each lift that I can possibly think of. So for the squat, let's take the tempo squat. Okay, now the idea in this case, okay, specifically, is we just want to improve our squat. Okay, now keep in mind that each progression that we do needs to have some sort of logical goal. Okay, it's not just about doing whatever movement that's non-specific and translating it into the main lift or some kind of variation of the lift that we want to improve on. There's got to be purpose behind it. So for this specific case, okay, what we're trying to improve is just a squat. We just want to improve the competition squat, and so we take something non-specific, but not something random. It's going to be with purpose, okay? So in this specific case, the tempo squat can be a good idea for someone to hone in good technique or tightness throughout the entirety of the lift. Stability, strength throughout every portion of the lift, and something like a tempo, especially for the squat being such high demand on technique, okay, is going to be a good idea for us to hone in these technical demands. Okay, so this can be a very generalized method of progression, but for people with longer femurs or people that have a lot of distance to travel through, or people that just struggle with their technique in the squat, this can be a very good idea. So the most simple thing that I can think of is the tempo squat. Okay, so we start off with a tempo squat, and now we run that for a block, and we can do singles, doubles, triples. Preferably we start with, remember, a higher rep range is also less specific. But the thing with a tempo lift, we don't want to go too high rep range, okay, because the higher the rep range and the lighter the weight, okay, those are conducive to one another. So the higher the rep range, the lighter the weight, okay, and the lighter the weight, the bigger our margin for error. So we can get away with bad technique with lighter weight. So when we're doing tempo lifts or paused work or things like that, we want to make sure that the rep range is low because we want the absolute load or the load on the bar to be high. Just a little side note there for any of you who do tempo work. All right, so we start off with a tempo squat, and we do singles, doubles, triples, maybe sets of 4, okay? And we run that for a block. Now, what's going to be slightly more specific, but in the same realm of what we try and achieve with this tempo or controlled eccentric, okay? The next thing can quite possibly be a pause squat, okay? Typically, we'd want to pause in the hole of the squat. Okay, that's where most people would typically have higher demand for tightness and good position. But we can do like a pause above parallel, and we can possibly do a double pause squat. Okay, but for the most part, pausing in the hole, okay, is going to be a good idea for most people. So let's go with that one. Okay, so we're starting off with the tempo squat for an entire block. We move on to the pause squat for another entire block. Again, singles, doubles, triples. We don't want anything too light because we want the high demand on our technique and positioning. Okay, and now quite simply, the next one is the competition squat. Okay, so that's a very easy, very simple, short progression. That's 3 blocks, very easy. Okay, if we were to jump straight from a tempo squat into a squat, of course that can work. Okay, but the more concise we are with the translation from one variation or movement to the next, okay, the better that kind of carryover will be. So here's a good example. If you were to do a leg extension for an entire block and you are hammering leg extensions for the quads, right? Now in your next block, you are substituting the time that you have focused on doing leg extensions in that same time frame or that same space in your training block. You're not throwing in a competition squat to have that sort of translation. Yeah, that's going to be very, very difficult to judge, and quite possibly it's going to be not as much carryover. Okay, it's not just because the leg extension is very low specificity towards the squat, because we can have a series of movements like a hack squat, a high bar squat, and then a competition squat. That will be a better sort of progression. So it's not that we can't use a leg extension as our first exercise for this progression. It's just that if we are taking away all the intermediates, okay, that jump straight from leg extension to squat, it's not going to be very effective translation. Okay, it's going to be very hard for us to translate the technical aspects of these 2 lifts from a leg extension to a squat, right? So not going to be the wisest decision to make. But a tempo squat translating into a pause squat into a comp squat is going to be a very nice, simple progression. Okay, now let's look at something a little bit more advanced, a little bit more complicated. Okay, we're moving on to a beltless high bar squat, 0 acceleration. So the 0 acceleration is basically a more fancy way to say a tempo, but it is slightly different because usually with a tempo we are quite concise with the count. Okay, so for tempo you would give like 4 seconds eccentric, 1 second pause, and then most likely no control in the ascent. I'm not a big fan of doing a counted ascent. Okay, we want to produce maximum force with the concentric portion of the lift. But with a 0 acceleration, basically what you're doing is you're not really so focused on counting a number of seconds as you go down. It's simply just having full control of the weight on the way down, in the hole, and coming up. So a 0 acceleration lift could be 5 seconds down. It could be 2 seconds down. It depends on the lift. Okay, so 0 acceleration is simply just saying I have complete control of the bar throughout the entirety of the lift, and I'm not utilizing momentum or speed or anything like that to kind of gain some force. Okay, so a beltless high bar squat, 0 acceleration. This is a very good idea. Why? Because how we can translate this is remove one non-specific aspect at a time as we go from block to block. So what are the non-specific variations within this movement? Okay, so firstly we've got beltless. Okay, we know that the belt helps us brace. It helps with a little bit more intra-abdominal pressure. Okay, so I know that a lot of people aren't big fan of beltless work, but from a theoretical standpoint, anything that's helping you lift more weight is a variable that we can remove to improve any sort of quality of the lift. So if a belt is helping you lift more weight, okay, within the context of what the belt can typically do, removing a belt will be more challenging on whatever it is that we're gaining from having a belt. Okay, whatever scientific literature you want to throw up, it doesn't really matter. Okay, if we're taking off the belt, it's more challenging for a reason. Okay, so whatever that reason is, we are working on those variables to help us improve by then throwing a belt back on. Okay, but quite simply, one can be confident in saying that taking off the belt is higher demand on your brace. Okay, so we're working the brace here. Okay, so for a beltless high bar squat, zero acceleration, the beltless aspect, okay, is a non-specific variable that we're throwing in. Okay, so what can be the next jump? Okay, we could potentially do a high bar squat, still zero acceleration. Okay, now we've removed the beltless aspect and we're going one step more specific. Okay, typically what we could also do is utilize something that's not got anything to do with a beltless aspect, or something, one of the other non-specific elements. Okay, that could be the zero acceleration, or it can be the high bar. So we can typically go beltless squat, zero acceleration. Okay, that's also a possibility. My favorite would quite simply just be to do the beltless high bar squat and not have the zero acceleration aspect. Okay, there are better ways, in my opinion, to utilize that kind of tempo or control, like we've explained with this tempo progression here. I'd rather be doing that if my focus is a tempo. Okay, but in this case, the focus is more kind of stimulating the quads and all the muscles involved in the squat using the zero acceleration. So now we are just making it more specific by removing the zero acceleration element. Okay, this is my preferred way of doing it. I think it's more about what kind of aspects and elements of the lift are we biasing for quality. Okay, and in this case, the zero acceleration is the least specific or the least crucial one to hold on to during this progression. So we throw that away first. Okay, now obviously a beltless high bar squat is going to be more weight on the bar than the beltless high bar with zero acceleration. Now we have two elements left, okay, the beltless aspect and the high bar aspect that's non-specific towards the competition squat. So next up, what can we do? Now this is a 50-50. You can either do a beltless squat or you can do a high bar squat. Okay, either way, it's really going to depend on where you want to throw the demand on. So if you're choosing the high bar squat direction and removing the beltless aspect, okay, quite simply, you're just throwing a lot more demand on the quads, the adductors, and less on the brace. So if that's your goal to improve on, go that route. If your goal is more the brace, okay, do a high beltless squat. Sorry about that. Beltless squat. Okay, that's going to be a kind of low bar position. Beltless, going to be a lot higher demand on the brace. Okay, and then quite simply you end off with a competition squat. And that's your progression. Okay, a little bit more complicated. What you can also throw in prior to that is maybe a beltless high bar ATG squat, zero acceleration. What are we doing here? Okay, we're just including another non-specific variable, the arse to grass kind of element, okay, which means you're just squatting deeper. Okay, extra range of motion is going to be less specific, it's going to be harder to achieve, and obviously a lot more challenging. So that can be a very, very, very nice progression, and I definitely recommend anyone to at least try this one. It's very nice. Then we can look at something that's specific to a variation and not necessarily specific to the main lift. So in this progression that we're going to do now, we're not really working towards the main lift, we're working towards some kind of variation. And let's say it is the high bar squat, okay, which is a variation to the comp squat. So the goal here, the purpose of this progression is to enhance our adductor strength or capability within the high bar squat or even the normal squat. Okay, so we start off with a Copenhagen plank, directly targeting our adductors. This is very non-specific because it's an isometric as well. We're not going through lengthening and contraction of the muscle. We're simply just applying isometric tension to it, and in that way, throwing a bit of challenge to our adductors. Okay, what can be a good next option? Okay, before we go into some sort of more specific movement, okay, what we actually want to do is we got very new exposure with this Copenhagen plank. Now we want to include an exercise where we go through extension and flexion. Okay, so maybe your adductor machine in the gym, you go through extension and flexion of adductors. Okay, this is a lot higher demand on the adductors to work hard and still very novel. So we've got a good little translation there. Okay, now we are looking at throwing this adductor strength into a squat pattern. Okay, so in your next block, you can potentially do some kind of wide stance something. A wide stance leg press, a wide stance belt squat, maybe a wide stance hack squat, whatever it may be. Okay? So for powerlifting purposes, everyone loves a belt squat for some reason. That is very nice. But let's go for a wide stance belt squat. Okay? That's a nice progression from an adductor machine to a wide stance belt squat. Now it is a tricky one because we are translating from one exercise to a completely different movement pattern, but it's the closest thing to involving a lot of adductors in the squat position as we can, especially since the belt squat has got no tension on the spine. There's no technical demand for like a squat movement pattern really. You just simply flexing the knee and extending it in this wide stance position. Okay, so that's a nice little translation there. Next, we can go a little bit more specific and either go to a normal belt squat. I don't feel there's a massive difference here, and I don't think that's the wisest decision because of this lack of differentiation. I'd rather go for something like a wide stance high bar squat. Okay, doing that, we're getting the specificity of the squat with a barbell on our back. Okay, but still in the wide stance position. We want to bias this wide stance position. Okay, now we are translating into either a normal high bar, okay, which is a fantastic variation for anyone to have in their training, or just a wide stance squat, a normal low bar squat, just a wide stance. Either way, it's going to be a very nice progression, and then you can sit with this last variation for a while and really improve. Okay, so also keep in mind that the less specific a movement, okay, the quicker it is to improve and saturate the returns of that movement. So Copenhagen plank you can only do for so long before you've hit a wall. Okay, as you go up in the ranks, okay, ending off with something like a wide stance squat, you can do that for years and still make improvements, depending on what kind of training modalities you use and rep ranges and volume and things like that. Okay, so the more specific we become with our lifts, the longer we can improve on it and the more returns we can get. Okay, but that's also a very nice progression for the adductor strength. Okay, as if you know me well, you know that I am a big fan of adductors for the squat and the deadlift. All right, let's move on. Okay, you've got the basic gist of what we're tackling. So for the bench, okay, something very simple is spoda press, going into possibly like a 3 count pause bench or just a long pause, doesn't have to be 3 counts. What's nice here is we've got very much like a lot of tension at the bottom portion of the lift with the spoda press. Okay, going into a 3 count, that's more specific because the bar touches our chest. Okay, but with a 3 count pause, we are spending more time at the bottom, so still high demand at the bottom, but it's more specific to the main lift. And then we go simply into the main bench. Okay, very nice progression there, very simple and can be for anyone to try. Note though, I don't really give long pause benches for athletes that have a very big sink in the chest, just because they're relieving a lot of tension already. So even if they hold it there for 2-3 seconds or 2-3 counts, okay, there's not going to be a much bigger demand at the bottom because they already are relieving so much tension there. So this is more progression for soft touch benches. Anywho, let's move on. Now a little bit more complicated one, a close grip Larsen press, again 0 acceleration. So what we can do now is have a look at all the different elements here. We've got the close grip aspect, we've got the Larsen aspect, and the 0 acceleration aspect. Okay, and now we can take away one at a time depending on your goal. We can go Larsen, 0 acceleration. Okay. So in this way, we're taking away the close grip. This is if you want more demand on the pecs and the wider position. Or we can go close grip, bench press with 0 acceleration. Okay, in this way, we're taking away the Larsen aspect if you want to be much more technical in your lift, because obviously the bench has got higher technical demand with regards to leg drive and things like that. So if that's an issue for you or you need tons of work there, this is a better option to go for. But once again, my favorite will be the close grip Larsen press with no 0 acceleration. So that's going to be more specific and probably the route that I would take for my athletes. Then next up, we can look at the other two elements that we can remove. And this is going to be 50-50 again, based on your needs. Okay, so close grip, bench press. If you want more shoulder strength and need less of a, or if you want more shoulder strength and you don't really want to have too much time without the leg drive, you want to improve the leg drive and the technical aspects of that, or you can do just a normal Larsen press. Okay, this way we are keeping the leg drive aspect away, if that's your goal, and focusing on that wider position. Okay, so let's say that's the route we take, and then we finish off. We finish off with a bench press. Okay, that's a very nice progression. If you want to up it even more, we can throw in a close grip, cambered Larsen press with 0 acceleration. What you're doing here again is improving range of motion. So the cambered bar is that little arch in the bar and will help you go a little bit deeper in that bench position and get a little bit more stimulation of the pecs and even the triceps as well. Okay, so that's very nice. Okay, very wonderful progression over there. Now let's look at something that's directed towards a variation and not a main lift. Okay, in this case, we've got a dumbbell press, and I put in here, I didn't want to say a military press because it really depends on where your incline is on the bench, but a 6 units of incline. So if you think about every unit that you can put your bench on an incline, let's say, for example, the 6th one is like almost upright. We don't want a fully upright military press. That's just going to be uncomfortable for the shoulders. We want a slight incline, but let's say this is 6 units from the bottom. This is going to be very, very simple. If you are someone that's looking to improve your shoulder and tricep strength, okay, you start off with a very high incline or 6 units incline, okay, and you work your way down. And each block, you do 1 unit of incline less. Okay, and you do 5 units down, or 5 units of incline, which is 1 unit down. Okay, next one, you do 4 units of incline. And so as each block goes on, you are dropping that incline until you get to a flat dumbbell press. Okay, I'm going to run through all of these now. Units incline, and then a flat. Sorry, let's got one more, 1 unit incline, and then a flat dumbbell press. Okay, so you can literally go through one. This is a very slow progression. What you can do is remove intermediates, which will be a bit quicker. So you go 6 units incline, 4 units, then 2 units, and then flat. Okay, that's also very chilled. Okay, but if you really want to be concise, you go through those intermediates, the 5 units, 3 units, and 1 unit. And that's going to be very, very slow, strict progression to improve your shoulder strength and making it more specific to a flat dumbbell press, which if you want to, you can take it from there as well. You can do like a, let's just do a Larsen press and then a bench press. Or you can do a, you can go straight to the bench press as well.
So you can you can translate or progress from the flat dumbbell press to the bench as well if you want to. But let's say we're working just up to a flat dumbbell press. This is going to be a very nice progression for that. All right, now let's look at the deadlift. So we've got our simple progression. Let me just move my little camera here. So we've got our simple deadlift progression. Let's start off with a deficit eccentric deadlift. Okay. Basically, the eccentric idea is just a slow descent when you put the bar down. Okay, just because we know that the deadlift is basically just a concentric. When we throw in an eccentric portion, controlled, okay, that just allows us to improve or hone in the technical aspects and obviously tax the hammies, the back, and the glutes a lot more. Okay. So a deficit eccentric deadlift we start off with. This is someone that wants to improve their posterior chain, quite specifically, maybe even just hamstrings, or maybe even upper back with that deficit being a little bit more rounded. Okay. Now, from there, we've got two elements that we can remove, the deficit and the eccentric. Quite simply, I would definitely go with just the deficit deadlift instead of taking the deficit away and doing the eccentric. I'm not a big fan of eccentric deadlifts, but they can work for sure. And for the sake of this idea or this simple progression, I wanted to throw it in. So a deadlift eccentric, deficit eccentric deadlift, going into a deficit deadlift, and then a normal deadlift. Okay, very simple translation there. Next, let's look at something a little bit more complicated. This one I love. I've done this one myself, and it's fantastic. So the beltless deficit stiff bar, stiff legged deadlift. That's a mouthful. Okay, so we've got multiple elements here. We've got the beltless aspect, once again for the brace. We've got the deficit aspect for extra range of motion or just posterior chain. We've got the stiff bar aspect, okay, which makes it a lot tougher off the floor and getting tight from the get-go and like no slack out of the bar, obviously. Then we've got the stiff-legged portion, okay, which is really going to be much more demand on the posterior chain as well, and specifically the hamstrings. And then, those are the four elements, okay, of non-specificity. Now, we can pretty much go any route. If you want to improve hamstring strength or something like that, we'll keep in the stiff-legged. Let's say we keep in the stiff bar and we keep in the deficit. Your back's pretty strong, you don't need the beltless aspect. So we go deficit, stiff bar, stiff-legged deadlift. Okay, that's one option. Okay, another option could be if you want to really focus on, or if you're quite strong off the floor, you don't really need that extra demand, then you just remove the stiff bar aspect and you go beltless, deficit, stiff-legged. Okay, if you aren't too phased about the extra range of motion, you can remove the deficit. Okay, so it really just depends. If you don't really are phased with the stiff-legged portion, your hamstrings are pretty strong, you just want to improve the range in your normal competition deadlift, then you remove the stiff-legged aspect. Whichever way you go, it really doesn't matter. But let's say we go with this one. Beltless, deficit, stiff-legged deadlift. Next up, we can take away either the beltless or the deficit. For argument's sake, let's take away the deficit, and we go beltless, stiff-legged deadlift. Okay, now we're really just taxing the back and the hamstrings quite hectically. And now we go beltless deadlift. I spelled that wrong, whatever. And then the deadlift. No man. Okay, so honestly, you can go whichever route and take away whichever element you want at a time up until the deadlift. Okay, very nice one here for posterior chain, for brace, back, hamstrings, everything. Okay, extra range, or what have you. So this is a very nice one to utilize. And now let's look at the very last one, again working up to a variation and not necessarily the main lift. Okay, if you really want to improve your hamstring strength, okay, just take a hamstring curl. I like the seated hamstring curl because of the extra hip flexion that you've got. Puts the hamstrings in a much more lengthened position, and it's full lengthened position at the top of the lift. So we start off hammering seated hamstring curls. Let's say we start off with a high reps, and we go to low reps. We can possibly do that. Then our next block, we can translate this into a more hip hinge movement. Okay, so let's say a belt RDL. If you don't know what this is, it's basically a Romanian deadlift or stiff-legged or what have you on a belt squat machine, taking away the load on the spine. Okay, so this is going to be quite a nice translation, going from a hamstring curl into a hip hinge dominant movement. Okay, so what's nice about the belt RDL, okay, is it takes away all load on the spine, and it specifically just targets the glutes, hamstrings, maybe even a little bit of adductors as well. But we don't have the technical demand of any sort of barbell hip hinge, okay, or any sort of deadlift movement. Okay, next up, we've got, let's say, a normal Romanian deadlift. Okay, it's going to be still the stiff-legged kind of position, very much focused on the hip hinge, very high demand on the posterior chain. Okay, but now we're including the spinal aspect. Okay, load on the spine, and obviously using a barbell. Okay, then we can go from then we can either stick with the Romanian deadlift as your variation. Okay, that's quite possibly a very good thing to run for months and even years. And to be completely honest, I would give like most of a year's worth of training, like most of your training. I will, if you're my athlete, I'll probably give you some sort of Romanian or stiff-legged deadlift in most of your training forever. It's a very stock standard kind of variation tool to use, and you can make progressions with it pretty much forever as well, as long as you're switching out different types of stiff-legged deadlifts. Anyway, so we've got the Romanian deadlift here, which we can run through. We can go to a normal deadlift as well. That will obviously, of course, definitely work. And or we can do like a deficit deadlift. Yeah, this translation is quite interesting. Not everyone kind of gets the idea behind this, but if you think about it, a Romanian deadlift, what does it do? Okay, it not only improves your posterior chain and hamstring strength, okay, but it allows you to be in a little bit more biased hip hinge position, okay, which is the same concept with a deficit deadlift. You just have the same amount of knee flexion as a normal deadlift, but in essence, the kind of hip hinge is most of the time quite similar between the Romanian and the deficit deadlift. So that's a nice little progression here, because obviously you can most likely deadlift more deficit than Romanian, because you've got a little bit more knee flexion here, and so this progression can be very nice as well to use. And then of course you can go to the normal deadlift, or you can just stick with the deficit deadlift for a very long time as well and make improvements there. So that's the deadlift. Now, we've got a basic overall rundown here of what you can do. You can do a shorter, simple progression for the main lift. You can do a very detailed progression going into the main lift, or you can do a muscular specific progression towards a variation that also biases that muscle group, whatever it is that you want to target. And so you can basically do that with all three lifts in any way, shape, or form. And honestly, this is all about being creative, intuitive, and knowing what your body needs. And so when it comes to weak points, we don't just throw in wide stance high bar squats or Romanian deadlifts for hamstrings, or a close grip bench for shoulders and triceps, or what have you, or a military press for shoulders and triceps. It's not simply just doing some movement that biases a muscle group or weak point and then expecting really good results. Sometimes that can happen for sure, but if you really want to be concise and know for a fact that what you're doing is either helping you or not, these can quite simply not be beneficial for you. These can quite simply not have any effect, and then you know, well, that's not maybe the problem. Maybe the problem is something else. So if you want to be really accurate and be confident in what it is that you need to work on and what's going to help you improve, this is the best way to do it. We've got so much time in training. Okay, how many variations do we have in our training? 2, 3 for each lift, every single training block. We've got lots of space and room to kind of fiddle with all these different progressions and see what's going to help us and improve us in our weak points, and quite ultimately improve our main lifts. So be creative, be intuitive with these. Do whatever the hell you want to be able to get your main lift or some kind of variation stronger. So that's pretty much it for progressions. Please like and subscribe. and I will see you in the next video.